Good afternoon. Today we're going to talk about a difficult subject. We're talking about a toxic workplace, the emotional abuse that takes place in a toxic workplace. Not just emotional abuse, but covert emotional abuse. What makes it covert is that it's not out in the public. So if you wanted to seek legal recourse for a toxic work environment, you would have to call it a hostile work environment, and there would be harassment involved. We're not talking about that today. We're talking today about what it is to be covertly emotionally abused in the workplace. So I have lots of experience with this from several years ago, having worked for two different toxic workplaces. And so I know about it, have a lot of passion about it. And I also am very concerned about it as I work with clients who have also been covertly emotionally abused in the workplace. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like and then what we can do about it. So, from a management perspective, covert emotional abuse looks first like micromanagement. So why do I say that? And we hear that all the time. People, managers micromanage. Well, why are they doing that? They're probably doing that because they're scared. I don't know for sure. I can't psychoanalyze them very well since that's long distance, but I would say that, if I'm really scared of failing or I'm going to get in trouble with my board or that, some other power initiative won't work, then I might micromanage. So, what is micromanagement? It means that every detail of your job has to be overseen by me. Not only overseen by me, but sometimes either done by me or taken away from you and given to somebody else if I don't think you're doing it, quote unquote, right. So, that's micromanagement. And it is a little bit like an abusive parent, emotionally abusive parent who says, go do this and this and this and this, but they come behind you, trying to say, no, don't do it that way, do it this way, or let me just show you how to do that, or yank it away from you, the broom away from you, and say, let me show you how to do that, with some, passive aggressiveness with it as well. So covertly, that wouldn't be snatching the broom away, but it might be passive aggressive remarks like, I thought you could do that better, things like that. So it sounds like, yeah, well, I'm trying to help you because you can't, thought you could do it better. But actually, no, it's passive aggressive. So then the next thing would be to develop a highly competitive culture. And why is that? Has the potential of emotional abuse is because there is so much competition between peers that peers might initiate covert emotional abuse on each other to try to get advancement, to try to get promotions, to try to get greater pay, to try to be the favorite of the boss, to try to just be liked by the boss. So, yeah, setting up a highly competitive environment or culture in a workplace by the boss is very much has creates the potential for covert emotional abuse. Another thing I mentioned it just a second ago is favoritism. If an employer picks out one, maybe two different employees that they really favor above others, not only does that cause consternation among other employees, but it sets the favorite employees up with way too much power, which means they, in turn, might begin to emotionally abuse or micromanage or otherwise create competition in the culture. So, but not only that, what that means is that everybody else has to compete with the favorites, or they have to live with the idea that no matter what they do, no matter how hard they work, no matter how many presentations or projects they finish, it's not going to matter because the favorite is the one who gets all the praise and the money and the power and the prestige. Yeah, so favorites is another one. Demeaning but passive aggressive comments. I mentioned that just briefly a minute ago. But bosses, managers, CEOs can do that with comments that make the person who is being passively, aggressively, emotionally abused to believe that they don't have a skill. It creates lack of confidence. It makes the person feel as if they really can't compete in that environment. Can't you do better than that? I think you can do better than that. Passive aggressive, right? And then there's the expectation of perfection that often comes with micromanagement, but there's also more of a covert expectation, even if you're not micromanaging and you're the manager, you can just kind of put it out there passive aggressively that you're expecting more. You might do trainings actually that insist upon excellence. And everybody gets the message that they better be excellent or there might be consequences. So that expectation of perfection is also a way of covertly emotionally abusing in the workplace. And then one of the worst, I think, is the sneakiness. So what do I mean by that? Um, One of the most blatant examples of sneakiness is to get some employees to spy on other employees. And so the employees that you get to spy feel like they have a modicum of power and that maybe they're being picked out by the boss as somebody special. And then they go spy and then they report back to the boss what they've seen. Whether or not what they're reporting back has any real merit, doesn't matter. They feel empowered. And the person who's being spied on may or may not know they're being spied on. They may get a sense of that. They may begin to intuit that. They may begin to discern that by just kind of watching what's going on. And then they feel very threatened. So, those are some ways in which a manager can emotionally abuse the employees in a system. Now, there's also peer to peer emotional abuse. So, what does that look like? Again, we've got demeaning comments, but they're usually made peer to peer, they're usually made in private so that nobody else will know that they're emotionally abusing. So, every now and then there might be a kind of passive aggressive comment made in front of other people, but it'll be very subtle. But most of the time, if there's a demeaning comment, it'll be made in private. That's emotionally abusive. And then we have the one of the most difficult things to deal with is covert bombing. What does that look like? Not bombing, mobbing, sorry, mobbing. So mobbing means you gather together a mob of people in an environment, and all of those people gang up against one employee. But this can be done covertly. Now, it can be done overtly as well, and that becomes much more of hostile work environment, and that would require legal recourse. But in the case of covert mobbing, it looks more like one of the peers going around quietly telling other peers things that they might use against the employee. And what that means is that they all kind of get together and believe this thing, and they feel like they all have to protect themselves from the victim of mobbing by, subtle means, subtle comments, undermining, that kind of thing. And the employee that's being victimized begins to feel it. They begin to feel very unwelcome in their own workplace. And it can be extremely threatening because they feel like they have no recourse. There's nobody there they can trust. And so it can create a lot of emotional repercussions. And we're going to talk about the effects of emotional abuse on the workplace in just a few minutes. But the other thing is that if there's mobbing or if there's not mobbing, there is the undermining of your work. So that might mean that they won't tell you when there's a meeting, so you won't show up, or they might take. I heard of one situation where somebody was actually putting something into the computer, and somebody was coming behind them and erasing it, so that nobody would know that they'd done their job. Or it might be more obvious, like sabotaging a project. So, but nobody else will know about it, only the person who got sabotaged. That's why it's called covert. So then we got repeatedly crossing boundaries. Now, I say this because when you lay down a boundary in any situation, whether it is at home, in a relationship, a friendship, work, wherever it is possible for people to try to edge across that boundary again. So that's pretty normal. And that's why the person who has laid the boundary has to maintain it. And that's why I talk about boundaries being something we do for ourselves, not to try to get somebody else to do something, because that's a mistake. When we say, I'm going to lay down a boundary and they're going to leave me alone. No, they're not. You lay down the boundary so that you can take care of yourself within that boundary. And you are the only one who can really maintain it. And oftentimes we're the ones that walk right through our own boundaries. And we do that by feeling sorry for the other person or feeling guilty about it or not being able to maintain any objectivity about it. So typically, unless we take the boundary down, the other person might keep trying to get it down. But if we maintain it, eventually they'll either stop or they'll go to some other method, but that might be even more overt, in which case you might be able to show somebody else that they're actually doing it. So, what I'm talking about is a pattern of crossing the boundaries. You lay down a boundary, they try to break it. You lay down another boundary, they try to break it. You lay down another boundary, they try to break it. That's a pattern. So what we're talking about is a pattern of breaking down boundaries. Another thing is to just lie about you. That would be sabotaging, especially if they lie about you to a manager. But it can also be sabotaging if they do it with your peers, because peers might start to not trust you. They don't trust you because they're telling lies about you, and the lies they're telling might be pretty malicious. That's covert emotional abuse. And then another thing is questioning your reality. So you say something happened and they deny it or distort it. It didn't really happen that way. It happened this other way. So that's another one. Blaming you for things that are out of your control is another one. Inconsistent treatment. So if I take you out to lunch today and later this afternoon I start making demeaning comments, then that's inconsistent treatment. So all of those are forms of emotional abuse, covert emotional abuse on the workplace, in the workplace. So what happens? What happens to us when we get emotionally abused in the workplace? Well, the first thing that happens is we begin to doubt ourselves. We begin to doubt that we have the ability to do what it is that we're supposed to do. And that can affect performance, which then creates more self-doubt, which then creates more difficulty performing. And it becomes a vicious cycle until ultimately we get very, very threatened that we might lose our jobs. So then there's the imposter syndrome. You've read a lot about that online. The imposter syndrome is where I feel that I'm really not that great at what I do, but I don't really want anybody to know that. So I'm working really, really hard to make sure they don't find out that I'm really not that great at what I do. I really am good at what I do, but I don't think I am. And that can be developed over time when we're emotionally abused by peers or by management, either one. So that's another effect. Another one is confusion or difficulty making decisions. So once I start self-doubting, then I might, especially if I'm talking to you about something that happened and you deny it or distort it in some kind of way, then I'm going to start wondering about my own reality. Is that really what happened? Do I remember that the way it happened? Maybe I'm crazy. That stuff. So then we begin to not only doubt our ability, but we begin to doubt our own reality. That's a sign of emotional abuse. And so we can develop other symptoms, difficult symptoms like anxiety and depression and insomnia and even physical symptoms. So those are some of the effects of emotional abuse on the workplace. So what are we going to do about it? Well, the first thing we need to do is recognize it. We need to recognize it and call it for what it is. It is covert emotional abuse. And I would encourage everyone who's listening to this to go to Google, Bing, wherever you go, and look up emotional abuse and look at all the signs of it and check them off. Which ones are happening to you at work? Most of the things you'll see online are about emotional abuse between two spouses or two partners in a relationship. And so that's what you're going to see, but you can still check off the points about that. You can also look up toxic workplace and see more about that as well. Then you begin to notice its effects. What's happening to me as a result of this emotional abuse? Am I anxious? Am I depressed? Am I self-doubting? Am I developing a imposter syndrome? Am I unable to gather together my own sense of reality? What's happening to me as a result of this emotional abuse? And then you might want to calculate the risks of taking the next step, because the next step will lead in a direction. The first thing about that step is that it's pretty safe if we do it right. You can start documenting. Document the name of the person, whether it's a manager or a peer, the name of the person or people. Document the time and the date and the place and the witnesses. Write all that down and then document how it affected you, but do it with some objectivity. We don't want a lot of reactivity in your notes. Okay. Now, it's really important to do this in a private place. You don't want somebody getting your notes. You don't want somebody getting your documentation. So I would not encourage you to put it on a computer where other people can get access or can hack in and get access. Put it in a place, maybe at home, where people won't get to it. Okay. So yes, document. Be sure to keep emails, copies of emails that were sent that have some evidence of emotional abuse, and projects that somebody sabotaged that you can provide evidence for. Keep copies of that. What you're doing is building your case. Now, the next step might be a little riskier. That step was done in private. This one might require going to HR or to an immediate supervisor, or even above an immediate supervisor if that's required, to report, to give a copy of your documentation to. And you might want to take a union rep or somebody that you trust at work, take them with you. If it's a supervisor of a supervisor and your supervisor believes you, you might want to take that supervisor with you. You're creating a modicum of safety that way. But you need to calculate this risk. How much do you trust your HR? How much do you trust your immediate supervisor or your immediate supervisor's supervisor or whoever you're going to report this to? How much do you trust them? Okay. Then you might want to consider legal advice if it escalates, or you might want to just talk to a lawyer, a free consult about what is going on and see if they consider this to be escalation, if it's harassment, or if it's or if it affects you so badly that you have to miss work for it. Those are things that might be taken into consideration by a legal professional. The other thing is, anywhere through this process, I would encourage you to seek therapy. That does not mean you're sick or that something's wrong with you. It means you need support. You need support. You need objective support of somebody who will be able to say, yes, this is emotional abuse. Yes, these are the effects of emotional abuse. And then what can you do about it? So those are some of the things you can do about the actual abuse on the workplace. The next thing is to be able to heal yourself from the emotional abuse, and a therapist can help you do that. Okay. So that's our show today on covert emotional abuse in the workplace. And if you need more information on that, if you're a therapist, I'm teaching a workshop on this very subject on April the 10th. It's a virtual workshop. You can go to my webpage and learn more about it. It's AndreaMatthews.com. Matthews is spelled with one T, not two. AndreaMatthews.com/events. And you will see a workshop on there, virtual workshop on there. You can click on that and learn more. And then you can register if you'd like to. Okay, that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. We'll be back another time.